Mysteries.
Take her to the moon for me, okay?
Okay, guys. Going to the moon. Okay, guys. Going to the moon.
You're listening to Moon Mysteries, hosted by KAYLEIGH and Gator, a show based on the mysteries of the moon and all of its folklores. From its origin story to its purpose and function, even how it affects our emotions. There will be 2 shows a month. One focused on the astrological placements and transitions of the moon that month, and the other they'll be focused on an interesting guest giving their perspectives, insights, and research on the history and mystery of the moon. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure to like, share, subscribe with all of your cosmonaut friends, and get ready to dive into Moon Mysteries.
Hello, welcome to Moon Mysteries. My name's KAYLEIGH.
And I'm Gator.
Welcome. So today we actually have another special guest for you guys. Really excited to introduce this lovely lady. So every other episode, as you guys know, we've been doing a little bit of a breakdown and kind of a sharing episode, and then an interview episode. And this one, we are bringing in a lady known as Maria Wheatley. The first video that I saw from her actually was talking about megalithic structures and the veneration of the goddess. And I'm super excited actually to ask questions about some of the things that she's brought up in several videos, and some of the areas of study that she is known for. So right before we came live, I was speaking about how impressive and full her resume is. Maria is an astrologer, a tarot reader, a master dowser. She's a renowned speaker and author. So without any further ado, welcome, Maria.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I have to take it away, Roman. You next.
Okay. Yeah. So some of the awesome books that she's written that are just right up our alley for the other shows that we get into and all the topics that we talk about besides the moon. But she has a book called Druidic Soul Star Astrology, The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, Avebury, the Sun, Moon, and Earth, and also hosting 2 wonderful websites that I highly suggest everybody go check out during the chat. You got esotericcollege.com. Simple and intriguing title. And then you have the aveburyexperience.co.uk, where you can find a lot of the work that from the books and things, and in an online platform. It's amazing. So it is an honor. You have quite a vast knowledge on a lot of the topics that we like to talk about. Very kind of niche in a lot of ways, but these things that are starting to reach and breach the surface yet again, thankfully. And so it's amazing. And today we are going to talk about the moon and this megalithomania conference that you gave a presentation. That's what really caught our eye on your work, because you were talking about the veneration of the goddess in the older days. Would you consider there to be a time when we did have a complete matriarchal society?
Yes, in the Neolithic period. That's about 5,500 years ago in the British Isles and elsewhere in the world, because all the sites were geared up and aligned to the moon, which has always been seen by many cultures to represent the feminine, the goddess. And it wasn't until around 2500 BC when it changed to a goddess culture, to a masculine solar land ownership. So also going back 5,500 years ago, and perhaps we can listen to the wisdom of the past to learn from today, they had communal land, communal burial sites. It was we. When the masculine solar cult came in, it was I own this, I have this. And they were single burials as well, rather than a communal burial. So yes, it all changed around about 2500 BC to a hierarchy system, which, if you live in the British Isles, hasn't changed that much. With the lords and the kings and the earls, it goes on. So yes, it was once a deep goddess-based society.
Yes, I am hoping that we get to bring that back. I was raised by a single mother. I have lots of beautiful sisters in my life, and I am just always reminded of the power of the feminine and what women bring. It's something a lot. It's just beautiful, and so it's time to bring the veneration back and to bring this knowledge back into light, because just the family togetherness community over the past couple of years, if that hasn't shown us what is truly needed in today's modern society, then I don't know what will.
I mean,
I'm really
for
curious.
instance, sorry, Kelly.
No, you go ahead, Maria.
I was just about to say, even when we look to the most prestigious burial site around Stonehenge, it was dedicated to a woman. They were highly venerated, and she must have been a priestess and probably a high queen in her own right. And it was the largest, and is the largest long barrow in Northwest Europe, and that was for a woman.
That's really cool. I actually have a question about Stonehenge in particular, and maybe you can answer this for other sites, but it's always been my understanding that it marks the solstices and the equinoxes when those points in the year occur. And I believe I remember from your talk you saying that there are other stones that also mark things like the lunar standstill and stuff like that. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, the Stonehenge that we're all familiar with, and we can see it in our mind's eye now. We've only got to mention the word and we see it. That's phase 2. If we go back 500 years to phase 1, Stonehenge was a massive stone circle with what's called the heel stone, an outlier, a single stone that's like in front of it. And that was geared up for a lunar alignment of what's called the moon's metonic cycle at its standstill. Basically, every 9 years, the full moon would rise above that stone in all of its bright glory. But if it occurred round about the time of the winter solstice and it was an eclipse, it would rise blood red over that stone. So that's the main lunar alignment at Stonehenge. When it was tinkered with in 2500 BC in phase 2, the Stonehenge that we're all familiar with, the people widened the avenue so that from the center of the new Stonehenge, with its mighty trilithons and huge stone settings, it was a near alignment to the summer solstice. Every single professional archaeoastronomer knows that it's more accurately aligned to the moon and to the midwinter sunset. But people gather at the solstice, and so say something enough times with enough gatherings, and it becomes a truth, even when it's the weakest alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Fascinating. Thank you. That's really cool. I want to dig into that more. We are coming up to a time where we'll have the lunar standstill pretty quickly here, aren't we?
We are, and at Avebury Henge, I discovered one of the long-lost lunar alignments there to the moon's metonic cycle. It's called the moon's most northerly moonrise at Avebury, and it's where a huge stone, what we call the grandmother stone, it's the oldest feminine stone, because the shapes of stones at Stonehenge and elsewhere, all across the British Isles and Europe, if it's a diamond shape, that's said to be a feminine stone, type A stone. And if it's more column, it's called a phallic type of stone, a masculine stone. So at Avebury, you have the heaviest megalith in the British Isles, weighing well over 100 or 120 tons, aligned to that moon rise, which I discovered in 2006 at the last major standstill.
Cool. I love that. Do you happen to take any like videos or pictures of that lunar rise above that stone at all?
Yes, yes, I did. And here's the irony here, Kayleigh. I was invited a couple of guy friends around to witness it, and there was one member of the Druid community there. So there was about 4 of us there, and their cameras would not work for them. It was only
Ah,
my camera that would allow the pictures to be taken, and it was really representing the divine feminine, because it was a discovery that I had a hunch about, and then got an astronomer friend to definitely calculate, and so I was granted with the shot. But I'm not a mean person. I said, give me your cameras, and I took pictures on their behalf.
that's sweet of you.
They
I love
caught me on
that.
a good day.
Yeah.
That's
Wow, that's really
hilarious.
good. Like,
I want to ask a question before we get too far away from Stonehenge, because I don't. This is not a completely Stonehenge conversation, but since we are here talking about it, and a lot of your work is looking at these older alignments, I talked with Professor Rupert Till, who wrote a really great paper called "The Songs of Stonehenge," and he dives a lot deeper into archaeoacoustics, which is a fantastic branch of science that I love, and it's all about reverberation and sound, and this different tonal frequencies that these older um, these older constructions have. And now
Mm.
we're looking at the moon, the mother moon here, and these alignments, and there being some sort of magnetic anomalies happening here, but also music, another M archetype here. So what have you found in your research, the importance of music and tone, and the way that these stones might be constructed to have a specific reverberation or delay?
Well, in my next book, which is just coming out, I discovered the music of Gaia, but I'm not going to touch upon that now because it's going to be in print, where I've
Nice.
looked into harmonics, mathematics with another professor as well. But suffice to say, Reading University, under the auspices of Dr. Aaron Watkins and David Keating, did look at the acoustic effects, and it's a bass tone that reverbs at Stonehenge. But one of their unique findings was this. If you imagine there's a barrow, which is a round structure with rooms inside of megaliths. So it's inside a dome-shaped structure. And that was, some distance from a long structure that also had megalithic chambers or rooms inside. And they're separated by well over 200 to 300 meters. That's what we are looking at now. If you played the drum very bassy or really bass sound toning, you couldn't hear it outside of the round cairn, the round barrow. But if you were in the long barrow, it would come up through the ground like the sound of thunder and reverb in your body. So even though some monuments are separated by some distance, they do allow some very unusual acoustic properties. Same as the King's Chamber in Egypt, that has immense acoustic properties as well. Sound was an integral part of the ritual activity of our ancient ancestors.
Oh yeah, I'm a wooey boy. I like to go deep down into the constructs of the woo side of things because it is so fascinating to live in the creative juice. And I feel like creativity and imagination is a gift that is a part of life. So if it's happening to us, or what have you, it has to have a little bit of seeds of truth to it. But you have to have proper discernment. Anywho, I would love there to be a cavernous earth in which there's some very sacred music being played from the center of the planet and reverberating out, and it's I I cannot wait for all of these research. I can't wait for your book to come out. That sounds amazing. Thank you for giving us some insight on that. But I can't wait for us to just as a collective come out with we're breaking the veils on so many ancient things. And it was asleep for a long, long time. And do you think that that has something to do with one, technology, or two, um this talk of like a great awakening that's happening on a celestial scale?
I think it's never gone away, but it was withheld by mystery schools, for example, and other secret organizations. So the wisdom has always been there, passed down from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, to the Druids, to the Templars, and so on and so forth. So for the elites, it has always been there. It's been for the masses that's the awakening. Because if you go to sort of the very elaborate and educated people that went to Eton here in England, well, they know all about sacred geometry, but maybe you weren't taught that at school. So I think what's happened is it's the awakening of the masses that's happening now, and that's where, like you said, discernment needs to come in, because there's great information, there's misinformation as well. But what I feel strongly is if we reconnect to what the ancient ancestors created worldwide, so you can be anywhere in the world and there's similar monuments, then we can reconnect to the past, because that way we can then learn, maybe intuitively, maybe sensitively, maybe through just being in place. It does something to us because we're in an altered state of consciousness when we're at an ancient site. And when you're in that altered state, the alpha brainwave, if you will, things do happen.
What have you experienced being at these places firsthand during these huge lunar movements?
Numerous things. I mean, it's quite common to have downloads. So I got a download of an astrology book at one sacred site near Stonehenge, which was kindly published in America by Dolores Cannon, because it was all about past lives. And I was Dolores Cannon's sacred site guide for many years here in England. So yeah, so it really does awaken you. And I've had massive Kundalini rising experience in Egypt that was very unpleasant, actually, but did lead to much more of awakening. But on a very subtle level, it doesn't have to be shebang for people to experience the earth awakening inside of us again, that reconnection to the earth. It can be very subtle and very quiet, but a gentle knowing. So by being on earth energies, meandering currents or straight ley lines as you call them, then we can start to reconnect with Gaia's arteries and veins. And there's numerous different types of energy patterns that are very, very strong, like spiral patterns and huge circular patterns as well. They're the power places. It's not just where two lays cross, it's where you have lays, grid lines, spiral patterns, earth currents, and earth currents rising out of the ground. That's called a geodetic center. It's not where you could just have one thing going on. Do you see what I mean? And a lot of people from various authors even think it's just the crossing of layers. Well, that's not a power center. It has to have layers, like an onion of power that's activated at different times of the month and the year.
That is beautiful. Ties in 100% with all of the esoteric teachings, that magical practices can be done during a certain time. Divinatory practices held very highly with astrological workings and the celestial clock. That's wonderful. KAYLEIGH, I see that you have unmuted and you want to say something.
I'm ready. Yes, I love the just thinking about this just now. It's to be a spot with layers. Reminds me instantly of this idea of orgone energy, which is obviously it's tied together. But are you familiar at all with the work of Right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, many years ago, about 20 years ago, I likened Silbury Hill, the largest man-made mound in Northwest Europe, quite close to where I live. I live in a megalithic capital. I live by the world's
Yeah.
largest stone circle. So I'm very spoiled
Mhm.
and very, very privileged. But that was built 4,500 years ago, Orthodox dating, in that same layering method that was used by Wilhelm Reich. Okay. And it was surrounded by a
Wow.
moat. So what I suggested back then and still do now is that that was irrigating the land through its ripple effect of the energy patterns that it was sited above. And I went to do some electrostatic tests and ionization tests on top of the mound with an engineer with a control at the bottom. And it was 1,000 times greater, the electrostatic field at the top compared to the bottom. And if that doesn't make your hair stand on end when you're on top of that mound, it feels like you're going like this. But it really does. Again, if we go back to that concept, it opens you up to the wisdom of Gaia. And she is 4 billion years old. And my lifetime compared to Gaia's. And if we can tap into the Akashic record of the past through these earth energy points, like acupuncture centers of her body, if you will, then we tap into our own wisdom.
I love that a lot. That's so cool. Wow, topic of, well, actually, I'm gonna take a strong kind of like left-hand turn here. Question that I really ask our guests, and it's okay if you want to get super weird and out there with this answer, but what do you think the moon is?
Mm.
Well, many theories abound from hollow moon. It rings like a bell to that there's too much of a coincidence for an eclipse to occur, to a rock that has been pounded in the past. For me, it's not necessarily what the moon is, but what the moon does and how it affects the earth and especially earth energies, because at certain times of the lunar cycle, not the full or new moon, but the way the druids worked with the moon, that's when it's most powerful for the earth. So for me, it is a feminine aspect. It reflects the sun. It has its own kind of essence. And my ancestors worshipped it. They put stones aligned to it. Therefore, to me, it's a live, living being that I venerate just as much as my ancestors.
I love that answer. One of my favorite answers actually came from my astrology teacher. He likes to say that the moon is an incarnation device, and I also really love that interpretation, along with the living, breathing moon aspect. So, how do you use the moon when it comes to reading astrology charts?
For me, it's about past lives. I mean, I focused mainly on two branches of astrology: past life, through how I believe the Druids looked at a chart, which I'll explain in a moment, and also geodetic astrology. And that's where you place the zodiac around the world and it becomes a world zodiac. And I was saying earlier that about 23 years ago now, I changed the meridian line from Greenwich, London, to a massive, powerful ley line that goes through Stonehenge and made that 0 degrees Aries. And then when you come to 0 degree Taurus in the world, that starts at the Taurian Mountains, and then the Ring of Fire is in Leo, for example. So I kind of use world astrology, and I look at how things are at the midheaven, which is directly above, can trigger certain events, even like earthquakes. I mean, the recent earthquake we had was at when Uranus rather was at 15 degrees Taurus, and lo and behold, on the world map, that's where it was. It was within that area. So it's quite incredible. But so for me, the moon in world astrology represents countries and people and places. And in my branch of past life astrology, it represents a past life as a woman and a psychic link to the bloodline of all of the feminine bloodline, be that your mother, your grandmother. So I'm not your traditional astrologer to look at the moon as just being a planet with attributes. Again, I look to place. What does the moon hold? We have in London, it is said that it has Cancer rising. So part of the English psyche is the moon, because it's related quite closely to the British Isles, for example.
Mm.
Cool. I love that. And I love all of the different alternate ways to look at using any of the planets, but the moon is such a mysterious, nebulous thing that I love all of the different answers that we get. So thank you for that. That's fun. I'm going to think about that now.
In terms of Earth energy as well, we always think about a new moon and a full moon. Commonly, we do. But in terms of Earth energy, if you imagine there's a spiral pattern that is the surface pattern of very deep water produced by Gaia, independent of rainfall. Okay, so there's what's called deep waters born of Gaia, and it's going on a rotation like this, counterclockwise. 6 days after a new or full moon, precisely 6 days, it changes its rotation pattern. The Druids were fully aware that was a time when they would only pick their most sacred curel, mistletoe, 6 days after a new moon. They would only get a snake's egg, which is like all the adder skins mixed together. It was, worshipped 6 days after a full moon. And there's lots of mythologies and legends of stones going down to the river to drink 6 days after a new moon. So it's, stones. Stanton Drew, the second largest stone circle in the British Isles. I should say England, otherwise I'd have the Scotland and the Irish and the Welsh after me. So I'm going to say England, correction, England there. And yes, and I think that's the moving to drink the water from the River Chew, as it's called there, is that ancient awareness of water beneath the site. It changes 6 days. So I think it's a legend, a living legend that stems from earth, wisdom, and knowledge.
Now, is that the 6 days after the first crescent appears or after the exact conjunction occurs?
They're the conjunction. So
okay,
one
cool,
day before
cool.
the first and last quarter.
Right, yeah. I was calculating that in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. I wonder what 6 days. Do you have any insights into why specifically 6 days, or any speculations anyway?
It's because all the waters beneath the earth are changing their surface pattern rotation, and that gives a surge. And they're always found, these spiral patterns, at ancient sites, which have vast amounts of underground water beneath them, not just ground aquifers of rainwater, but the deeper waters. Now that surge in energy, if you imagine that the megaliths that are sited above that spiral pattern are then bathed in this type of vast energy, which has a piezoelectrical effect. When you touch it, you'll get tingles and all sorts besides. So I think it's about that day was so sacred to our ancients. It's the surge day. It's the kind of big day when we can experience megaliths like no other day.
Wow.
That's really cool.
That's really good to know. Great tips for voyaging and looking at these looking at sacred sites, and just how we might view the moon and the relation to the moon and water. It's really, really, really amazing to have this new knowledge about the Druids and their connection to not only the tide, because the tides in the moon, that's pretty exoteric, right? We understand that on a level, but the moon and the inner waters and the inner workings of those waters, the inner,
literally esoteric.
Yeah, it's esoteric waters. Now that is fascinating. I want to ask you now. This is a perfect segue into dowsing. Right, we've been talking about druids and the moon. Now, were druids dowsers? Is this part of their path?
Absolutely, because when we look to ancient Druid legend, which I think is holy history, some people can just say it's legend, I say it's holy history. One of their teachings was that at the center of the earth, there's a massive amount of water that they called a well, around which grew 9 sacred hazel trees. So that's why the traditional water divine in Rod, the twig, was hazel. It's very sacred to the
Right.
Druids. It was from the world's inner waters, and it's very, very sensitive. So that's the first branch of dowsing, was probably using hazel, and to find particular power points to place ancient sites above. So for me, dowsing is not necessarily the art of finding something. Indeed, it does, whether it's a ley line or underground water, whatever. But deeper than that, it's forging a relationship between us and Gaia. And the rod and your sensitivity alike, your body responds to these energies. And then as you get to know more and more different types of earth energies, you're getting to know the esoteric anatomy of Mother Earth.
It's cool.
Is there a druidic tarot?
Yes, there is. I mean, traditionally, the Druids had their own divination system called the Ogham. It's spelled Ogham, so it's often incorrectly pronounced Ogham, but it's Ogham, like Ogham money. That's how I always say, remember it by. We all know that. And it has it's all about trees and the tree calendar and the seasons of the Druids. And they have symbols. So you'd have like the first symbol is birch, and it's a line with a line like that about it, sort of like a bit of a wonky X, if you will. And that represents a bit like the fall in the tarot, new beginnings, because if there's a terrible like ice age, or there's some cataclysmic event, all the vegetation will die, but the first to be reborn is the birch tree. And so that's why it represents new beginnings to the Druids, who were very, very close to the tree kingdom and created 25 symbols that are used in the Ogham.
And the birch is supremely medicinal tree as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the birth of aspirin. The bark? No, that's willow bark.
Yeah, and the aspen tree. But birch is very good for things like rheumatics, arthritis. And also, she's the lady of the woods. She's the mother. So from everything, birch is born. And it's a beautiful tree. It has very delicate branches that sway in the slightest breeze. So to the Druids, it was especially revered, the first mother.
Well, it's only one word away from the word birth, right? It's, you just replace a C with a T, and you got the word birth, and that's a beautiful symbol. Makes perfect sense. This Ogham, I just said Ogham. Wow. Ogham. The Ogham language does this predate the runes and the runic language?
Well, I'm sure the Germanic peoples would have their own argument against that. But as a kind of Brit, then yes, it does predate it. And it was found predominantly in the southwest of Ireland, in a very Celtic land, if you will. And so they used to be placed on stones as etchings, and you can make them into magical amulets by repeating them 9 times, for example, the same symbol, whether that's on a candle or something like that. But again, I can be such a tease. In my forthcoming book, which is out soon, I think I've predated all of the rune system to the megalithic period. I've looked into the symbolism there, and I think it long predates the Saxons. Truly. But the whole point with the Ogham, just to go back to the Ogham, is you link into the tree spirits. So as you learn about the Ogham, you're linking into that tree spirit of place. And so in Druidry, I mean, it's great to hug a tree. We all do it. It's lovely. And doesn't it make you feel good? You put your arms around a tree and you feel like you're falling in love with it.
Yes.
But to a Druid, you stand with your spine like a trunk, stalwart. And so I don't face the tree. My back is against the tree, if you see what I mean. So my chakras align with the
Ooh.
tree's chakras. And so before I hug it, it senses me. Do you see what I mean? And it aligns
Yes.
itself to me. So if you can
Yes.
be as straight as you can, so to speak, then that gives you a beautiful way in which to introduce yourself to the tree spirit. And if you have the OM symbol with you, with the OM symbol is empowered.
Cool. I know what I'm playing with today.
Yeah, mind blown. And so that correlates to these trees like suckling on the inner waters from this inner well that the druids held sacred. What is your opinion on because in the story of the Tuatha De Danann, it's during that battle, during that time of severance, when they basically say that they retreated into the land. Now, and then that's why, and the druids are birthed from the Tuatha De Danann, if I'm not mistaken, or they are remnants of.
Yes, but I'm going to give you a completely different take now.
Please.
Because again, I think that's a holy history of how we pronounce it, the Tuatha De Danann. But you say tomato, I say tomato. But what I think that was, you see, all of the mounds, the she to the Irish Celts were.
Sorry, what was the name again? She?
They just call them she, Sidhe, she. Yeah.
Nice.
What they were the mounds of the Neolithic, predominantly, like Newgrange, for example. That's a Neolithic mound. And what I discovered in the Stonehenge environs and across the British Isles in Europe was that the early Neolithic were very short. Their femur bones attest to that, and I've measured numerous femur bones rather, and they had long elongated skulls, which I photographed in Cambridge University. So I got the evidence, it's there, and I got the factual height of them. So they're really small now, quite fairy-like. And what happened was, in the Stonehenge environs, these very small ancient British people, a lost civilization, went to war with a much, much taller, almost giant-like to them, Bronze Age, round-skulled, Beaker culture people. Beaker just means a culture in Europe. We call it the Beaker culture in its archaeological context. Well, they fought around these places and they had a battle. And we know that they had a battle around these places because a lot of the very small, what I consider fey-like people, had head wounds that weren't healed. Therefore, you died of that wound if it didn't heal. So what I think that myth is a long holy history of when the elongated skulled, mythical looking people lost the battle, and the round-skulled people sealed up all of their mounds with dirt. They put the skulls in and the femur bones, and then they sealed them up and placed big stones in front of them. You're never entering here again. And in fact, they weren't until the 1950s. So I think a part of that myth, it has its roots into a long-lost civilization that has been ignored by archaeologists, but there they found their voice in me.
Wow. So the retreating into the land is their bodies actually being put in there and being hidden.
Yeah,
wow.
up, like I said, until the 1950s, when the local barrow near me, called the West Kennet Long Barrow, hadn't been excavated, and until the 50s. And places like Newgrange as well, they all had elongated skulls and small femur bones, just to get to the size. Women were about 4'9", 5 feet tall, and the men were about 5'4" tall. So they were very short, very strong, though. So that's where I think that they became that myth. They're living people. The once you go to these places, and I said they're above water, didn't I? Remember the big deep waters? Well, what does water have?
The inner earth knowledge.
Yes, it has memory. It's the Akashic record of place. So if we can tap into that Akashic, or you two would go that, you'd be getting stuff left, right, and center. I'm telling you,
Yes.
you're both sensitive. You're both aware, and so you could work with that. And once you're slightly aware, you don't have to be greatly aware. Just a little bit of
Hmm.
sensitivity, and you tap into that Akashic record of the past. Can change. It can be a game changer to people's lives, and I've seen it time and again by taking people to these sites.
Wow.
Wow.
Um, I want to ask you about your name, Maria Wheatley. Just intuitively, like hearing the name, seeing the name, because I love name archetypes. Like it seems the common pattern is whether or not our parents that named us, if they did, or however we got our names, happen in a way where it's just like kind of like intuitively chosen, or something, and then we end up fulfilling types of archetypes through our names, like without us even knowing it. Like our life journey is almost imprinted through the name. And I was wondering, have you looked into what's the symbology or the symbolic meaning behind your name? Because Wheatley is very important. I mean, that's one of the first agricultural crops that we know with Isis and Osiris and things like that. And then Maria obviously has or Maria, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but that has, different mystical symbology tied behind that as well.
Well, that's interesting that you should say that because I have looked into what my name means, just out of curiosity, to be fair, and it does mean deep, bitter water. In one interpretation. So I'm a water, I started off as a water diviner. I don't bore wells, so I don't want anyone asking me to go boring water or finding water. I've long gone through that phase. And of course, like you say, wheat and ley, like ley line, the ley at the end. So yes, so it's about kind of maybe dousing on many different levels, and that's what I hope to do with my next book, is to show humanity different ways of working with the earth to up food production, because I live in an agricultural landscape that is swamped in chemicals. And I've looked, when I was studying with archaeologist Lisa Brown at Oxford, I was looking at Bronze Age farming, Neolithic farming, going back thousands of years, and they all repeated the same pattern.
Mm.
When I looked into that pattern, I realized that they had a farming template where Gaia and her energies were at the heart of that. And I think it can enhance. I've done 3 years of experiments. I put my money where my mouth is. I don't like people that believe in things. I like people to know things. Yeah, it's great having a belief system, but if you're presented with something and say, this can lead us forwards, I feel in my heart that's where we can all move forward together, working as KAYLEIGH would probably tell you, with the moon cycle, lunar law gardening, some people over here call it. We work with the planets, we work with Gaia's energies. Then maybe, just maybe, we won't need those chemicals anymore.
I love also using practices of putting plants together that work well to companion planting and like just really basic stuff like that. But yeah, 100%. Um, so I'm curious about these experiments that you've been doing that you just mentioned. Will that be in the book as well? Because you're teasing us
Yeah,
a lot today.
I know, but I think it's really about putting new ideas forward and new experiments to look, because the ancients didn't, just to put it into real context, KAYLEIGH, the ancients just didn't have sacred sites above earth energies. They'd live above another type of earth energy to prolong their life. It is incorrect when archaeologists say that people only live to 30. I could give you a document now that says 70, 80, 80, 70. So put that to one side. So they worshipped above some types of earth energy, lived above other types, and then planted above other types as well. So it was living in harmony with that. And also what I noticed as well over my long journey with earth energies, they would place burial practices above particular types of earth energy as well, which the ancient Chinese were very, very astute about. Where you died and were placed was much more important than where you lived, because you carry that energy on for your dynasty. In imperial China, I'm talking, not modern day China. So all these different cultures were living and breathing by all the different aspects of earth energy.
I have a friend of mine to bring it back to Wilhelm Reich and those kind of experiments. I have a friend of mine places orgone pyramids and creates pyramids out of different materials in his garden, and has the data to show that just having those shapes in the garden creates, pardon the pun, megalithic growth compared to the that don't have that going on. Is that something that you have played as well?
Yes, because the shape of the pyramid was really researched by French dowsers, diviners in the 1930s. So we're going back a long way. And what they realized about the pyramid shape and the dome shape, which features in mosques and synagogues and various sacred structures, even the mounds of Ireland, they're corbelled, they're that dome shape. When you have that shape, it generates a very strong form of energy called the negative green. It's very, very powerful, and that can stimulate, and it can also, in its negative aspect, because if you imagine everything has its polarity, it will have its carrier wave that's positive, it'll have a vertical wave that's negative. All the colors of the earth and the esoteric colors of the sun have that polarity. And it can literally push energy out, and it can be even more enhanced if you put it on a good place on the earth as well, such as an earth current in the back garden. They go everywhere, they interlace the planet. So depending on where you place the pyramid as well, can enhance even more by generating that particular form. And in the 1930s, it went down in dowsing history. There was two investigator dowsers called Traumery and de Bellezel. They went to Egypt, found a particular type of object. They then went to their laboratories in France and filled an object so much with the negative green, what Traumery did, that he was found mummified with no smell of fermentation in his laboratory. And that went down in dowsing history. So it's something that the dowsers, esoteric dowsers, say negative green is the cure and cause of cancer. It's that strong. And there's energy devices throughout ancient Egypt that are said to enhance that or remove it from your energy field.
It's fascinating. I didn't know that about the mummified dowser. That's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, I'm repeating a story from the 1930s, and that's, like I say, went down in dowsing history. What I do know, even if that is a part truth, what I do know is a whole truth. I'm a second generation master dowser, and my late father, rightly or wrongly, decided to have the negative green because it's said that if you can use it correctly with particular places that emit negative green in the earth, so it can be a form of earth energy, then if you get a really big steak, it can shrink it in about 20 minutes to next to nothing, because it can take away life force. And I saw that. So the idea with some of the early diviners was, if you have a tumor, you don't take it out, you use negative green to destroy its life force. So if you take the life force out of something, whether that's a tumor or whatever, that's how they saw it going forward. But unfortunately, they all went underground and they never really experimented to the full advantage that I feel that they could have.
Right. Wow. We've gotten a little away from the moon. We still got Roman here?
Yep.
Okay, good. Just make sure you're still just enjoying the conversation.
I had to look up a little bit deeper into that negative green energy. So yeah, I did pull up my browser and was looking into that, because it's very, very important to me, all of the different sciences of earth energy, and trying to understand it more, so then I can communicate it with people of the community and we can try to realign it. But yes, let us talk more about the
Yeah.
moon and specifically the moon. Let's dive a bit deeper. Kayleigh, do you have a question or do you want me to go?
Mm, I was just curious, just thinking about harvest certain things at the 6-day mark after the new moon. How how would you even scientifically, I guess, observe the differences between that 6-day mark and stuff harvested right at or before the full moon? I'd be really curious to see some of that kind of data. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm still thinking about that. I'm thinking about my herbs that I like to grow, and I want to experiment with that now.
Well,
But I don't exactly have a laboratory, so
no, I mean, I think that what it is with the 6th day of the new moon, on some of our experiments with ionization equipment, it does seem to have higher amounts of negative ions during that phase. And then it will drop down. It's still quite high because you're above underground water, above these spiral patterns that are changing on those 6 days. But you are going to have increased amounts of, for example, those negative ions and a decreased amount of positive ions. And we know negative ions give us a feel-good factor. They're essentially good for us. And so I think on that level, on that physical level, it does relate to that.
fair, cool. All right, Roman, your turn.
Um, so we talked about the moon in association with the druids, who are fascinating. Well, real quick, would you consider the druids? Is it more of a like genealogical thing, or is it more of a like a religion type, or is it both? And has it been both? Maybe.
Well, I think in the past it was probably both. And for, people, according to Caesar, who was a conqueror, a Roman conqueror, and he wrote our history because the Druids never wrote anything down. They learned everything by rote. And they believed that their sacred teachings were too sacred to put down in writing. So when you get somebody that doesn't like you writing your history, it's they tend to portray the Celts as, barbarians and things like that, which they certainly were not. But England became known as the place where Gaul, that's ancient France, everybody would send their children, their princes, to learn Druidry from England. And Pythagoras himself, according to the great and late geomancer and author that's inspired millions of books, John Michel, he was into sacred geometry amongst many other things, he claimed that even Pythagoras learned from the Druids. So we see them as being far and wide, and in their teachings, it always goes back to the earth, to the seasons, to the eightfold year, to the solstices, the equinoxes, and those cross-quarter days in between, when KAYLEIGH would tell you when the sun is at 15 degrees Aquarius, it times Imbolc, this first day of spring, which is directly halfway between the equinox and the solstice. So it's all about in Druidry to be a part of nature. And today, modern day Druids, such as myself, we can still celebrate at places like Avebury or in your own home with your own altar these days. It's, I think, to me, Druidry is in the heart. And if you love nature, you're a druid. That's
Oh,
how I see it.
yes.
And if you love being by a tree, come on, you're a druid. And when we look back to the past of Druidry, they were also the people that divided up the land. They were the judges. They were the healers. And KAYLEIGh, you would have been called in the Druid order. There's 3 levels to Druidry. It starts with being a bard, then an ovate or a vat, It's called ovate today, and then you're a druid. Well, the ovates, they're the seers, they're the astrologers, they're the herbalists. So you would be an ovate druid. So it has many different orders. And the word Vatican, I'm sure you've heard about that in Rome, the land of the Roman Catholic
Of
Church.
course, of
That
course.
was sacred to the druids. It was where the Vates met to give prophecy. And that's where its name comes from. The Vatican is from the Vats, the ovates of the Druid order.
That is fascinating. Is that why there's so much serpent symbolism tied into the art and other constructs of the Vatican? Wow.
Yeah, and they would give their prophecies from there. It had a lot of original holy medicinal springs around it as well that were venerated long before St. Peter landed into that kind of area, if you will. So again, the Druids saw that place as being sacred. It has water. It would have had trees around it as well. So it was venerated.
So is there a tree specifically in the Ogham that is dedicated to the moon or symbol?
Willow would be closely associated with the moon because it likes to live by water, which is Cancer is associated with the moon, water sign, and it's also considered a very feminine sign of intuition and sensitivity as well. So yes, I think it would be associated with willow.
The willows make a mist, right? Like they actually legitimately weep. They cry. They precipitate. They create water from their limbs, and that's part of the lore behind the willow, which is so cool. Which ties in even more the sacred waters. So beautiful.
I love that the willow is one of the first sources of pollen for bees.
Oh wow. That's very
lovely.
fascinating. Yeah. Wow.
One of the first. Yeah, that's cool.
And yeah, I mean, we all know how sacred honey is, and how very, very, very far back that goes. I mean, there's not a time basically that we almost. I wonder what if we could find the association with agriculture and honey, if they came hand in hand. I wonder if the bee helped us understand agriculture, if following the tracks of the bees, and that type of knowledge, because we had to have discovered honey before, obviously creating honey, creating bee boxes. The history of that is really fascinating. I'll do a deep dive and have to get back to you guys on that. But so I wonder if the moon plays a role in these sacred sites and the magnetic anomalies that occur there at this time. And if so, okay, here's another question. Sorry, that first one, please go back to it if you'd like. But what is your knowledge or feeling, at least, on the ancients and their will to ascension and will to ascend?
To the ancients, it wasn't necessarily ascension. It was going in the ground. So it's going to that which is below. It's even if you look way back, it was the emergence point came from the earth, and the descending was into the earth. It was all about the Earth Mother, and even near Chaco Canyon, you had a very sacred emergence point to the Hopi and the Navajo, where they came out of the ground. That's how the Druids came out. They came out of the ground. So I think it's maybe a slightly different way of experiencing the earth through these ancient cultures. So yes, I mean, they had a whole mythology in Celtic Ireland, for example, of when you went to the other world. Well, again, it's not necessarily up on high all of the time, and it was a place where there was for youthful youthfulness. There was a land of plenty. It was beautiful with mythological creatures and beings that you would be side by side, island after island. As well. And the inner realms of the earth is where the Fae, which in Celtic mythology are tall, they're not like Tinkerbell, they're not little people. They're tall and they're very powerful, the Fae. And they too could take you into mounds and into the other world where you'd be there for one day and you'd come out and it'd be 100 years or 10 years later. So it was all about going into the earth.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
that makes sense with the association of the feminine being the earth and going in. And then ascension is this more masculine idea of going up and out.
Ah,
That's
yes.
just that association. That makes sense to me on a logical level. So that's kind of cool.
And
Yeah.
alchemically
Absolutely, I
speaking,
agree with you.
I was gonna say, alchemically speaking, it's if the earth itself is an alchemical still, and we are the things that are being distilled, the spirit goes up into the atmosphere as the salt goes into the ash, and then at some point the convergence comes back again, and is created into that transmutative. That's how supposedly that's part of the creation of the philosopher's stone, is to separate the two, separate the spirit, and that's a distillation, and the body goes back down, and then to bring them back together and cook it yet again. That is a philosopher's stone of sorts. And that kind of ties into a lot of let's I mean, hey, we're part of an astrology show too, so we can ask you your opinion on what is your belief of the cosmos. Is throughout history we've had many beautiful and amazing astrologers, Copernicus, Johannes Kepler, Tycho Brahe, and all these different viewpoints. And then now, we follow a new viewpoint. So what is your cosmological belief, and how do you view the cosmos and Earth's association within it?
Well, to begin with, we're part of a solar family, Soul, Soula, solar family. And Gaia's a part of that. And how I see just the solar system alone is the planets are very conscious of us and us of them. It's a two-way exchange. And so I believe and suggest that the ancient peoples, the Druids, and those that went before would not necessarily read a book about the attributes of the planets. They talk directly to the planet and listen and wait for the answer back, so to speak. So I think for me, the solar system is about working with the energies and the consciousness of each of the planets. And when we look to the ancient teachings, it is said that, each of the planets has a magic square and it has a seal that can kind of cut it off. And it has a spirit, which is its baleful side, and it has an intelligence, which is its beautiful side. So they have a polarity like us. And when we spread that further away, then we can work with all of the amazing different types of energies of the cosmos. So for me, it's a school. Jupiter can teach me, the moon can teach me. I get the teachings from Mercury, and the cosmos can be a university of teaching for me in this lifetime to raise my consciousness, hopefully so, to an enlightened level where I can expand my own soul awareness to become one with the cosmos. I'm sure I'm not there yet, but I attain to get there at some point.
You
So they're
will.
my
It'll be
teachers. The
beautiful.
planets are my teachers. The planets are there to guide me and for me to learn from.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's what's symbolically tied into a lot of these old mythologies as well, is that psychic communication between the planets. And that's a form of ascension in a way, but I think there's a lot of this. It, I think the ultimate communicator is the Earth. Like the Earth is the one that is going to be able to project the communications to these other planets. It's a planetary body. So, we're just like little seedlings of conscious drippings as we just slime mold as we exist, and then we go back into the Earth to come back again. It's wonderful. So KAYLEIGH, do you have something, KAYLEIGH?
Yeah, I really wanted to add something that you just said there, Maria, that it's a two-way conversation. I think that is something that we forget, and especially as astrologers, some astrologers anyway, seem to forget that it's as below, so above. It's always two ways. It's not just one way. There's a lady that I like to listen to. Her name's Kaylin Christel. You might be familiar with her. Something that she a lot is the mysteries inform us just as much as we inform them, and I love that. And it's just a subtle reminder that, like, we can read something about, say, Saturn or Mars. It's like, well, it's so much, but there there's more subtlety to it than that. And I love that you said that all of those planets can be teachers, and I think that's very true. So I just wanted to bring it back to that and emphasize that point.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think, in our hearts, we know that,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes our minds like to say, "Oh, but I've read this, I know this," but it's in the heart. That's what I said, that's what Druidry is. It's the love of nature. It's being in that heart space that guides you, speaks to you, but leads you somewhere as well. That's the wonderful thing. We're all on our own journeys and we're being led somewhere. And that's what my life has been about, going to different sites and understanding the energies, but being guided by something which I feel is a bit bigger than myself and more knowledgeable than myself. And I'm in great company sometimes, as we all are. And you don't have to go to a sacred site to experience Gaia's energy.
Mm-hmm.
You have to just go into your back garden, sense which part makes you feel nice in your house, which part makes me feel nice, which part don't I like,
Mm-hmm.
and just getting back to basics can guide you to where there's good energy. And animals, etc., they can guide us as well. With certain animals, like certain earth energies, certain plants do. Like, for example, yew trees, like geospirals, that big spiral I was talking about, and so do hazel trees, and oak trees. So they are on good energy points in effect.
Wow.
I like that.
So, I want to ask you this too. It's interesting. Like, there's some other theories on the moon that there's a potential projection point that it projecting some sort of like reflection, like the water has a reflection, something like that. And so there's all these different sacred sites from the ancient ancestors that laid them down, and they all have different. Almost seems like each planet has an involvement in it. Each solar body has an involvement in it, but some are very more specific to a solar body. So one, we know that the moon is in all of them, and a clock. But is there one that is specifically that you found that is the moon, or one that is specific Venus? And if so, were they traveling to these different sites for these different celestial times to have these very specific motives and meetings and connections and communications? Another, and before, and sorry, really quick, the reason I bring that up is because I've had this thought a couple times of, like, what if when they say that we're going to the moon, and they are talking about actually going to a more of a physical place here on Earth that holds the moon's energy, as opposed to actually physically trying to go to the moon body. Stanley Kubrick, who is famously noted for the guy who shot the moon, and they filmed the moon. Well, a lot of that holds a lot of truth when you look at the story of Nixon and why they there was a space race and why it was good to have footage to go to the moon in case they didn't make it, so they could tell everybody that they went. Stanley Kubrick was in the United Kingdom during that time of getting the call from Nixon, and he was on a set. And Stanley Kubrick actually ended up, he was born in New York, but passed away in the United Kingdom as well. And so that makes me think, yet again, speculation, obviously, but that there's a moon base, not on the moon, but on the Earth, that actually is like a psychic communication spot to kind of have these downloads and, and hold these esoteric workings.
If we look to Stonehenge, Aveburyhenge, which I've mentioned, and you put them all on a straight line, a lay, okay? So you've got site after site after site. There was a very ancient manuscript that then had this was long before anybody knew what the word lay was. So it was long before Alfred Watkins even coined the word lay. Then the Reverend Edward Duke, who lived near Stonehenge, he had all of these sites, 7, on this lay. And then he had circles going around them saying it was the orbits of the planets. And so Avebury represented the orbits and the planets of the sun and the moon. And even from the 1700s onwards, it was known as the circles, the temple of the sun, the temple of the moon. And then when we go up that line, you had Mercury represented by a site, and Marden was the site of Mars, which was a huge henge complex. Little is left of it now. It got ploughed away. But Den is an old English word for settlement or farm, farmstead. Marden, the settlement of Mars. And then you had Venus, for example, Jupiter, and Stonehenge was Saturn. Okay, and that was all on the line, said to be the point in which what you're describing very accurately of a kind of a magnetic pull of planetary energy, if you will, or a place where it represents that in its most powerful form. So what I did with that lay with an astronomer friend of mine, I said, well, if I extend it, because he noticed something very remarkable, because they're all like spaced out, some of them are quite close together, like the sun and Mercury and Venus, and there's gaps. And he had a look at the map and said, do you know what they were doing? They were using the mean distance from Silbury Hill, our Orgon accumulator that I mentioned earlier, as Earth, and dividing that by the mean distance to the planet in the heavens and projecting it on Earth. So using that mathematical model, and then the Egyptians think it's good having the pyramids aligned to Orion. Anything that the Egyptians can do, the Druids can do better. I'm joking there. And what we did was we found, with using that mathematical method, the outer planets that Edward Duke hadn't included in that era, which were the standard 7 planets of the day. So we went to Uranus first, because it was one of the first outer Saturnian planets to be discovered, as KAYLEIGH knows well. And lo and behold, it was at an ancient site. And then we did that for Neptune. And you'll love this, KAYLEIGH. Neptune was where, on the south coast of the British Isles, a beautiful settlement overlooking the seas. So, I mean, you can't get more Neptune. Absolutely. And very poetically, it really touched my heart when I saw that. And we couldn't find Pluto because that was now in a huge sprawling city towards the north of England. So I think what the ancients were doing, as above and so below, and these were these energy points. And I got another astronomer friend of mine to say, okay, when did the planets line up? Back in the day of the heyday of Stonehenge and Avebury fame, and it was 2,740 or something BC, when they weren't exactly above the planets, but they were in one of their beautiful moments of linear alignment that would have been seen from these ancient sites. So that's when I think, when we time it to the ancient site, when we time it to a place, and maybe even go to the planetary hour where that planet is said to rule even more, then I think that's one of the alchemic keys that can lead to the planetary energy associated with us on a soul level.
I love that word, alchemiques. I love that.
Now I know. Now I know I need to plan a trip where I can spend each day of the week going to each site on that hour. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
How
I mean, that would be a
Fun.
lovely way to do it. Actually, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
how
Right.
far away
Start
are
with the sun. And
these sites from each other? Do they have a certain specific equidistance, or are they
Only
close?
they're relatively close within a few hours
Oh,
of yeah. So you could be talking about 2 hours, 3 hours that way, and the same north to south as well. So that's a planetary lay system. So it's not, again, when we look at the humble lay, so to speak, it can be
mm,
very very complex. You can even get circular lays. The Christians favored those, for example, rather than the straight linear line of the ancients.
why is that?
I think it's because they were trying to replicate sacred geometry, the Vesica Piscis, where you get two circles together and
Hmm.
it forms that sacred geometry. That's in the landscape around this area as well, with all the churches on circles being placed on there, and that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to Marty Kane. She's an American dowser and a wonderful woman. And I was speaking with her and some of her experiences, and she was telling me about this site that was overlooking this ledge, and that this was the story of this site was that there was this rock that was there that could basically fly you over to this other rock, and that there was this ancient way of transportation that was dealing with magnetics, and then there's a potential that that is another reason why dowsing was so important, is because it was discovering magnetic lines, as well as water and mineral mines, and that
Oh,
they
absolutely.
could be. So have you found any lore of like travel through like magnetic rocks or floating rocks or anything like that?
Well, I've tested the to get the signal of, and it's electromagnetic. Tends to be they have an electrical aspect and a magnetic aspect. And what we did, you wouldn't get away with it now. So
Oh
A, for
yeah.
being these places a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I'd probably be put into jail if I did what I did a long while ago. Seriously. And we got proper copper probes to go right the way down with a control either side, okay, of what's called the Mary current. If you imagine you have a ley line and you have one female current entwining it, and then
Mm.
another male current entwining it, like the caduceus symbol or a strand of DNA. That's a powerful ley system. It's not necessarily the ley that's the powerful one, it's the electromagnetic currents that entwine it. That was discovered by Hamish Miller, who forwarded one of my books back in the
Nice.
late 80s. But the Chinese said it long before that, to
Yeah.
give them the credit. And what we found was this: if compared to the control sample of the female Mary current that entwines the world, she will go on to Uluru, she will go on to Lake Titicaca, she will go on to the Four Mountains in Bali, to name but a few. And what we
Shasta.
discovered was she was given Mount Shasta's on what's called the plume serpent, Mary's the rainbow serpent worldwide. And what we discovered was that the Hertzian frequency, as well as the kind of electromagnetic energy signals, was around 25 hertz. Now, if the ancients could manipulate sound, which I'm sure they probably could because they were acoustic masters, some would say,
Hmm.
others would argue against it. But if you change that to a kilohertz frequency, then that 25 hertz would become 25 kilohertz, which, according to researchers, is the kilohertz frequency of levitation. So I think that the currents were flowing into these sacred sites because A, they have a lot of electromagnetic properties, but they could have also helped with the making the stone slightly lighter. Is a
Hmm.
theory that obviously I can't prove that I haven't got the equipment to do that. But I think that's a part as well. So I think the whole movement and levitation aspect of dowsing is about the earth currents. Okay, because ley lines, the energy travels too fast in a straight line. The ancients hated leys to live on. Nobody lived on them, even in
Hmm.
China. That's why they have bowed roofs, so the chi flows nicely. If you have a straight roof, chi does that. Do you see what I mean?
Goes straight through.
So, yeah, exactly. So they were looking for these magnetic currents in the earth, which have the potential of levitation. Is my take on it.
Yep, glad I asked that question. That was amazing. I intuitively feel so much of this, and it would be the biggest breakthrough if we can come together to reveal this truth. And I think that we're close to getting there. All we need is a university approval, some higher corporate approval, and then once we get that, we're good to go. You look at Coral Castle. Edward Leeds Scallon said to have had this knowledge and wrote his book on magnetic current as well. And yeah, wonderful. Like I want to ride on a rock. I want to ride on a rock, baby. I want to fly on a sweet stone in the sky. So, but it's what's
You can go to that rock. I'll stick to Stonehenge and just fly from Stonehenge.
Yes, yes. And the drum circles. Have you been to these? I've heard of some of these festivals, these drum circle festivals that happen at the Stonehenge. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a veneration of what the ancestors would want, or do you think it's what's the word for it? Degrading. Do you think it's venerating or degradation?
It depends who's doing it and when. I mean, if you go to Stonehenge at the summer solstice, I've been there many years ago when it was really big, and you're around 30,000 people. It's chaos. It really truly is chaos. But then when you go to Stonehenge with like-minded people like yourselves, with an intent, with a sense of purpose, and a sense of love and a sense of coming together, then yes, that can change the dynamics of a place. It really can, and it will add to the spirit of place there. Because again, when we look at these places, I look at it as the spirit of place, the guardian, and the ancestors, and you get permission from all of those before I do any dowsing. I have to have that kind of permission granted, especially from the guardians of the sites, which over here have been associated with leys are black dogs. And when I've been teaching in Australia to a wonderful student of mine, he was privileged to know elders. I don't know any elders of Australia. He certainly did. And he said they too have boss dog. That's what they call it, boss dog. And boss dog is in charge of the soul lines. So your cultures apart now, cultures apart, and yet both are. Even the ancient Egyptians, they had Anubis, didn't they? The jackal-headed god, and the Greeks had Cerberus. So I feel that features into it all as well. Really seeking that permission, working together, and yes, then you could make magic afoot.
So that's fascinating. And the dog, well, there ties into a lot there. Interesting. And the Dogon tribe, right? That was that noticed that the Sirius star was a binaural star system, years before we had our normal optics. And then, like you say, you look at all these different dog associations with all these cultures. What's your take on that, on like the importance of the Sirius star in the north?
I was really privileged last year to meet Professor Robert Temple, who actually was the first researcher who wrote the Sirius Mystery. He spoke at my conference here locally.
Very familiar with
Fascinating.
his work. Yes.
Yeah, he's gone on to do plasma now, a new science of heaven to do with the plasma clouds in between the moon and the earth. I'm not going to steal his trumpet, as we say over here. But when it comes to Sirius, yes, I mean it was also Laird Scranton has gone on to do a lot more on the Dogon tribe than Professor Richard Temple. You'd love Laird's work. He's got quite a few books
Just had
out,
him
and
on
he's
Rising from the Ashes
did you
a
really?
couple weeks ago.
Well, yeah, I've led his tours, you see, over here, and he's a great supporter of mine. He's often messages me with really good things that he thinks are going to help my work,
Oh,
and
he's
vice
a
versa.
brilliant and
So
sweet man.
absolutely lovely, and it was great to be on tour with these people. You know, I love being on tour with authors and their people. It's a wonderful experience. So that's why I had to sing his praises when you're talking about Sirius. I never put myself first when there's greater writers on it, for sure. But yes, I mean, even when we look at the relationship between certain ancient sites, we're not just in the Dogon, but here in the British Isles and Europe, it was always about particular stars as well. And to the ancients here, Orion or Osiris to the Egyptians was Herne the Hunter over here with his dog. And Herne the Hunter is a really amazing character. He's a male. He represents the yang energy, but he has massive antler horns, so he's
Oh,
half antler. And at ceremonies at Avebury, you reenact. There's a guy that's always going to be the stag there, and he will arrive with his Herne, the hunter, uh, regalia. But yes, it's all about, looking at these individual stars that were woven into site after site after site here
mm,
in the British Isles. In fact, in 3000 BC, 2500 BC, you could see the Southern Cross from Stonehenge. So they had a different sky. It was very low on the southern horizon, but there nonetheless. And there's a brilliant author who wrote a whole book about all of the star alignments to do with monuments worldwide. So it was integral to the ancients.
wow. Yeah, and we're still wondering why. What is it that, like, we're still wondering why? I cannot wait to find out. Did we come from there? Are we going there? Is it the center? You know, so you study a lot of the and you're from the British Isles and the British Isles and ancient Celts and the Druids, and we talked a little bit about Germania earlier with the runes. Uh, and there's a lot of lore with the North. What was the importance of the North to the Druids, like the beyond the North Wind?
Yeah, the north was very powerful. It's where all the power of Gaia is, the north. So in a traditional court in the British land, the judge would sit in the north. A gypsy would do a tarot card reading from the north, for example. And so that's always been very, very powerful. And even when the pagans became Christianized around about more like the 10th century AD here, they still gathered in the north. And you had two doors opposite each other. You enter a church in medieval Britain and Europe through the south door, and there's the north door opposite. Well, because they kept gathering there, they blocked them all off and called them the Devil's Door, and so they became blocked off in Christian times, which you can still see in medieval churches. But beyond the north wind, to the ancients here, was a very powerful goddess, quite a lunar goddess in some right. She was called Arianrod, and she was personified as Corona Borealis, a circle of stars in the heavens. And that's where some people would go down to the underworld. But if you were a magician, a poet, a druid, a king like King Arthur, you'd go to the land beyond the north wind, the silver rotating castle belonging to Arianrod. And she was also the goddess of reincarnation. So she and her female attendees could look into your soul and decree whether you've, been good or whether you've been bad. And then you'd be
Wow.
reincarnated in our myths by being a shooting star coming out of the constellations. So beyond the north wind is Corona Borealis, and you'd be taken there by the KAYLEIGH goose, which is personified as Cygnus the swan, but it was a goose in more ancient times.
That's super fascinating. And the silver rotating castle, the stars, and the reincarnation is 100% tied to lunar symbology. How do you spell this goddess's name?
Oh gosh, without writing it down, I think it's ARIANHROD. I mean, Google might take you there. I mean, that's probably not spelled correct. Unless I write something down, I'm not too good at spelling. It's Arianrod, and she's a very famous. She was one of the few surviving ones that were written down by the ancients. So we don't have the same constellations as the Greeks. I mean, we use a Greek zodiac, don't we? Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. I think the Celts were completely different to that.
Wow.
And the Corona Borealis, the northern crown, was that a symbol of like her crown that she wore, or what? Like, I only know the Greek myth associated with that constellation. So was it like a gift to her, or do you know anything about like why the circle specifically was
Yeah, it was her silver circle in the heavens, her rotating silver castle that would kind of go round, and so it was associated more with a kind of circular structure rather than the, like you say, the kind of more of the crown. So it's two kind of different ways of looking at the same constellation from two different perspectives.
No, that's so cool. That makes me wonder if the North Star was there at that one point, like if that was the center thing circled around at one point or not. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but interesting.
Yeah,
like how nowadays it's polar, but it was right.
Yeah, I think the around about 2500 BC may have been Thuban from Draco, the pole star, and preceding that might have been Vega, but don't quote me on that. Yeah, that may or may not be correct.
That's fair. Wow.
The mounds, the round temples of ancient Hindu, the buildings of the East and the architecture of the East, we talked about them holding this specific resonance. And to me, it's symbolizing of like this old matriarchal society of when it once was. But then you start to see the Gothic period, the new architecture that it has all these different spires, and it's all very phallic, and it's definitely has like this more masculine energy energy surrounding it, which makes me wonder, well, there's no way that with all of the the conquering that the patriarchal society had done and absorbed that knowledge, syncretically absorbed that knowledge and syncretically laid its culture upon the old matriarchal ways and basically destroying a lot of these old temples and building their new temples on it, like I said, syncretically, there's no way that they didn't understand the workings of the physics, or they at least knew about it. Now I'm wondering maybe that they not only knew about it, but they knew that there was some sort of shift coming and the energy itself was changing on the earth. Or do you believe that they were trying to either one, manipulate the energy by using these different architectural constructs, or there was a something coming from the outside in, and this was a form of like maybe even a protection upon their power, something along those lines.
Yeah, well, first of all, you come to the Christianity, it went from the circular shape, which was, the be all and end all for the ancient people, whether it was a cairn, whether it was a barrow, whether it was a stone circle, whether it was another type of structure. They were tended to be circular. Even their homes were circular,
Mm.
round houses, as they were called. And then when Christianity really took off, especially from the 10th century onwards, it was based on two earth currents commonly crossing at a near cross angle, and that would be the geocross in the land. So it's like literally like a cross shape in the land of earth currents, occasionally lays. Now, if that earth current was female, for example, the church would be dedicated to a female saint, like Saint Mary. And if it was the male current going down the axis line, would be dedicated to St. Paul or St. Peter or,
Oh.
whoever. So that would decree, the earth energy would decree its gender to a certain regard. And you're right, it was about manipulation, but you couldn't take away the symbolism of the mother. And it's even called the Mother Church, isn't it? So
Hmm.
imagine now you have the altar, which is always at the eastern end, isn't it? And you now put your head at the eastern end, lie down with your arms like that and your legs down. You form the cross shape. Okay? So you're like that. That's how a church is laid out, to look like a cross, which some would argue that's the crucifixion. But
Mm.
in the guise of the Mother Church, as you walk down the aisle, the main axis line, you have quite often, my late father discovered it, these pulsation points, like coming up from a lay, activating it, activating you. And you can work with your 7 chakras by going down an axis line, because when you reach up to the where the choir sing from, that's the throat chakra. Then you go up another step, representing higher consciousness, to the third eye chakra, and the crown chakra is always on the high altar. So you're walking through the Mother Church on the mother body. So even though it did become very masculine, and you are right, there's always that hidden feminine
Mm.
symbolism that can be found somewhere. And at beautiful places like Glastonbury Abbey and Canterbury Cathedral, they do have these pulse points. Not all churches have them, but then when you stand and just work with that energy coming up to gently stimulate the chakra that you're on, you can go right the way up through your chakras. Because in medieval Britain, it was just the third eye chakra that was activated through the holy water and the cross over the third eye. That's what they do in medieval England, and some people in
Hmm.
the land still do that. But unless your whole self is being activated along that axis line, your third eye is not going to be functioning as a whole. And that's how the rites of the bishops would do the whole alignment ritual. It's called the bishop's run.
Wow. Do you think that do you think that there's a I don't know, that's a pretty stretch of a question. Uh well, the importance of the cross itself is important for many many ways, dating back to the ancient Ankh itself. The Ankh is a cross with it's the body with an elongated skull, right? If you want to look at the crosses like the of a body. But is the
I'm going
earth
to take that idea.
Yes, please do. Is the Earth ever represented as the shape of a cross in any cultures?
Yeah, yeah, it's like a circle with a cross on the
Oh,
inside. That's how one would depict Earth, and that's how some, Native American First Nation medicine wheels are to some regard. And it's when you have, in your own circle that you've made, cast of salt or with a wand or whatever, allows you to work with those 4 quarters as well. So you can create your own cross within your own magic circle.
Yes. Okay. You're right. Now I think about it, absolutely. Now that's super significant, especially looking at the blueprint foundation of the church and this beautiful esoteric function of this ancient architecture. And yeah, like it's, you know, talk a lot of, crap on the patriarchs that took over society and are manipulating us with this energy, so on and so forth. But I think that's a lot more recent than it was, like even at the point in the Renaissance and things. Because they're I think the function of the architecture and the deeper energetic and symbolic uses of these things was happening even up to a point in the 1600s. I think the Protestant Reformation was one of the major turning points, which is relatively recent in considering history. I mean, up after the Protestant Reformation, we weren't having any cathedrals built. The Masons were focusing mainly on building America out with the Capitol buildings that are put here. I'd say the Capitol buildings in America were some of the last major Masonic works of ancient Masonry and ancient architectural understanding. And they have a very special energy in them as well. But I digress with that talk. That is a whole huge other architectural talk that has so much goodness in there. I know that we're on our tail end here on the moon conversation, and so maybe let's get some final thoughts out on the moon, so we can end on a glorious lunar wave. KAYLEIGH, do you have any final moon questions for our guest here?
If somebody wanted to, say, start working with moon and the lunar cycle and whatnot, just on a personal level, what would be your number one recommendation for how they could go about doing that?
Mm,
For one, ask the moon, does it want to work with you rather
oh,
than expecting the moon to work with you? So I would say ask the moon. Yeah. And in quiet contemplation and in quiet love. Now, when I say about working with anything, whether it's the moon, a standing stone, anything, just stand there, with your feet slightly apart. And if you really feel a slight pull forward or maybe a little push back, it's like an acceptance, a magnetic pull towards the moon. It's accepting you. And then I would say, yes, start working with the moon energy and go through the whole of the cycle. Start at the new moon, the conjunction, and then wait for the crescent to be seen in the sky. And what a wondrous crescent it was before the full moon here. It was gorgeous. And then, go through all of the different phases, the first quarter, the full moon, the last quarter. And I love the wisdom of the dark moon. And the dark moon rises just before the sun in its very last waning crescent phase. So go out in the mornings. You don't have to get up too early at this moment in time. So the next time it's coming to about 3 days before the new moon on its last waning cycle. You can use Google, get up, look in the east, and you will see the most beautiful waning crescent crone moon, and then it goes jet black. There'll be no moon, a
yes.
moonless night, yeah? And then 3 days after that, you'll see the crescent. That's the triple goddess, the crone and the dark moon, and then the kind of maiden being reborn, if you will. So that's what I love. I would say go through that, but I always say to people, do it with dark moon as well, because now you've got the rebirth phase. You've got the moon in its crown, and then you'll look into the sky and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter, and the moon will fade and fade and fade, and then the sun comes up in all its glory, male and female united in one moment in time, the waning moon. So I would say work with that with love in your heart and asking it always, can you work with it? And if you're given that yes, then you will be given a wonder.
Beautiful. I
Fucking
love that.
fantastic. That was so good. Yeah, I have nothing. We need to end on that. That was so good. Wow. One of my favorite books of all time
Perfection.
on the moon is by Damatra George. And it's called The Mysteries of the Dark Moon. And it's mind-boggling. You got your work actually goes like this with that her work and that back to the megalithomania conference presentation you gave, spoke a lot on the triple goddess, and it's so important. I really recommend people do what Maria just said. Please, I know I'm going to let us chat about it on Telegram and the group chats and what have you, because this is a very special thing to have in our practices, as we are the lunar loonies around here trying to connect with the moon. Thank
Just
you.
ask, just that simple practice of asking for permission before doing something is so huge. Blow my mind.
Yep.
Consent.
What? Yeah, it's not just mine to take and to have and to reap with it. Maybe it's not that time. It's not that you can't work with the moon. Maybe it's not the time to do that. And each moon has a different archetypal energy. So yeah, very important. Also, people, when you're harvesting plants, it's the same way. You need to ask if that plant is ready to give you its nourishment and sustenance. Don't just go and rip all the leaves off of a lavender plant because you like the smell of it. Speaking from experience, okay, I've done that plenty of times, and I no longer unsustainably harvest. It's all about just proper increments and, yes, consent. Thank you so much, Maria. This has been a true pleasure. Do you want to let the people know where they can find you, what you got coming up, plug away your new book, any of the other books, anything? Let them know.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I mean, look up esotericcollege.com. I do tours to Egypt. I'll be going to Egypt in late March, and I'll be doing more tours to Malta. I do a budget tour to Malta. I like to cater for everybody, whether rich or poor, old or young. And yes, look at my books. My new book will be coming out within the next 3 months. I hope it's a game changer for growing food, for looking at Stonehenge on a different level, because I think we've been lied to even by how it looks. I've dug up old stones that were hidden because it didn't fit the bill, so to speak, or the model. So yes, so that's going to be the secret history of Stonehenge. That will be out soon. And then after that, I'm going to write a book, which I'm starting because that one's about to be published, which is about dowsing sites worldwide. What are the energies in ancient Egypt? What are the energies in Sardinia? Because like I said at the beginning, I've dowsed 16 different countries and 42 different types of earth energies of Gaia, and worked with the lunar cycles with Gaia as well. So it's exciting times ahead. You've been wonderful having me on. You're both very knowledgeable, and you're both switched on. You make really good hosts, and I know I've been in good company with you and your audience.
So sweet. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
I gotta love you.
The moonful to the moon. Oh goodness.
Awesome so much, Maria. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a lovely, lovely week, everybody. And yeah, that's all for us today. So much.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Cheerio.